Hello, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, my quest is to craft my two favorite things. Traditional stained glass, as well as all the other materials that I use for miniature building and crafting. I'm going to use foam, clay, of course the aforementioned glass, and I'm going to do so by combining them all into a lantern. On the sides, I'm going to use stained glass for the panes, and then when you open up the viewing window, you'll see everything that I crafted. I'm going to film it all, and let's get started. I've been making stained glass art for several years now, and I'll leave links to my social and website in case you're interested. I started out just as I normally do whenever I'm doing sculpting, wire and tinfoil. After cutting just a general size of the wire, I then wrapped it in tinfoil several times to build up the body and the bulk of the stem of the mushroom. I've been thinking about doing this project for years. One of my favorite things that I've ever made with stained glass was a lantern, the one that I showed you a moment ago. And now that I'm combining crafting and stained glass, I really can't stop thinking of the ideas of what I want to make. I got Star Wars, I got Lord of the Rings, I got Goblin Core, I got Cottage Core, I got all sorts of ideas that I cannot wait to build. So if you're enjoying this video, or you enjoy it towards the end, or if you just want to help me out, subscribing and liking would be tremendous. After I got the cap kind of figured out with tinfoil, I made sure that it fit inside of the lantern. I started cutting up the segments of clay that I needed to do in order to complete the clay form, and then just blended it together. This wasn't the first mushroom that I made for this project. In fact, I made one that was way too top heavy and way too tall. This one still is a little tall, but I made it work. After tapering the top of it to a point and blending it, I then started adding clay into the inside of it. And then once that was all done, I started scoring grooves and channels into it to give it interesting texture if someone was looking closely at it. Originally the plan was to have the LEDs inside of the mushroom cap, and I failed at that. So that was what this groove was for, was to hide wires. Anyways, I'll get to that later. For now, I started adding little polka dots to it. I wanted this mushroom to be whimsical and kind of playful. So I tried to do that. Once I was done with the polka dots, I started priming it white. I wanted variations in the height of the ground, just so it didn't look like a flat plane, so I just started carving it up a bit. While I was adding rocks, or rather fake foam rocks, to the piece, I used foam safe superglue. I shouldn't have used accelerator after that, because the foam rock had a reaction. I wouldn't say it was an overreaction, just a little one. Since if I ever got rid of this, sold it, or gave it to someone, and I needed them to be able to change the batteries, I decided that the mushroom needed to come in and out. So I put some sculpt mold on the piece, and then inserted the mushroom so it had a clear divot. I must have been a very bad operation player when I was a kid, because I made this hole for the switch way too big, which gave me trouble in the future. I started carving out a channel for the wires that never ended up going and using that channel, started vacuuming up the foam, and my X-Acto knife hitched a ride. I didn't want any of the white showing through the eventual static grass, so I painted the grass green, and then I painted the rock a rock color. The mushroom got a treatment of several coats of red paint, red mixed with a little orange, and then I did a bit of a beige tan underneath. I forgot to film it, but I applied a wash to the mushroom. I used Vallejo's Diorama FX, always thinking that it's going to be like a muddy brown color, and then I start using it and I remember it is quite black. So I end up repriming the whole base, not before sprinkling some sand and rocks. I put on the sweetest Mario 64 lo-fi hip-hop I could find on YouTube and just started painting white circles. I reprimed the base white again, as I said before, but this time I made another mistake by doing the grass a very neon green. This neon green started to peek through once I did grass, and I tried to hide it as best as I could. For the mud, I did snakebite leather from Citadel, the contrast paint, but I didn't like how uniform it was, so I added some flat brown to spots of it. I also painted the rock a rock color a second time. I added a wash to that rock and watched it come to life. My favorite part. I see a lot of really talented crafters on YouTube painting individual rocks in this case, so I gave it a shot. Once that dried, I applied static tack, the first time I've ever remembered the proper glue for static grass application, spread it around, and then used my applicator. Here you can see little bits of that neon green showing through, so I took dollops of that static grass glue, applied it to those little bits, and then just took the applicator again and sprinkled some more on. I put the battery pack into the top of the lantern with command strips, and then this was the moment I realized where I wasn't using a switch. I melted the foam, I destroyed the switch, and I just decided to go with something simpler. I found that if I ran the LED through the tracks that the stained glass panes are going to sit on, then someone could easily just remove the panes and then change the batteries. You ever just have a project where you know something needs to be done? You need to add something, you need to take something away, but you have no idea what to do? Well, that was this project for me. The mushroom just wasn't enough. It just didn't lend itself to be a perfect subject matter. So I thought making just a small travel pack out of clay, having a little bedroll on it, just was perfectly ambiguous to tell a story. While I was priming the backpack, I realized that I forgot to add backstraps, so I just threw some cardstock onto it, primed it white, and then broke out the snakebite leather again. In hindsight, I should have done the same method that I used for the backstraps for the straps for the bedroll, but you know what they say, hindsight is always 20/20, and it's 2024, so I really need to be moving on with my life. I painted the bedroll a nice cool popping blue, and then mixed up a little black and painted the underside of it. I then edge highlighted with a little turquoise, and did the remaining straps with a little Steel Legion drab. I stuck a little wire into the bottom of it, leaned it up against the mushroom, and it was great. Diorama Precepe has a product called Natural Leaflets Pro, which I am obsessed with. I add a little globs of glue on the grass and then just kind of like delicately sprinkle or apply these pieces of leaf onto it, and it's just a perfect like fall leaf color. I put some onto the bedroll and the straps to make it look like maybe the backpack's been here for a while, and then I move on to stained glass. I got into stained glass in the year 2020 when hindsight was really trending. I made a variety of different things and concepts and genres, but one thing I learned during lanterns is that the panels are everything. You want them to complement each other, and in this case, I think 2 mushrooms that are mirrored on each side would do great. I pencil them in, I darken out the lines with a Sharpie, and then I just flip the page over and do it again for a mirrored look. I chose to go with something a little more geometric for the back, and then since I don't have a laminator, laminated it with tape. This will provide me with a little extra protection when I'm grinding glass on my grinder, which requires a lot of water, so that if I do want to reuse this pattern, I can in the future. This piece of glass will lend itself a perfect color for the stem, and come on, look at this red. Usually people can fill up their cutter with oil, but I usually just dip the tip in and then start cutting the glass. If you're interested in starting stained glass, I'd recommend you do that. It's really fun, and if you're patient, you can achieve a lot more than you think you can. When I'm using opaque glass, I'll use my light table so I can see my design a little more easily. Once I've got all of the pieces cut, I usually grind. You want to leave a little bit of room between all the pieces for the copper foil. I got my left pane, I've got my right pane, my middle, and viewing pane. So now it's time to copper foil. Copper foiling is my least favorite portion of this process, but you gotta do it. You wrap each piece along its edges with a adhesive copper foil. Then you brandish it to the piece of glass. You then repeat this for every piece of glass in the design. This copper foil is how the lead and tin adhere during the soldering phase. After I always get my good close-up of the rehydrated sponge, I then take flux, apply it to the piece, and start soldering. For aesthetic and structural reasons, you want to build up a rounded bead of solder on each of your joints. This looks good and keeps the project alive for a long time. We're almost ready for the reveal now, so I will polish the solder lines and try and get any kind of grime and leftover flux or what have you off of it, and then I'll take a black patina usually and patina the piece. With that done, my quest was complete. Here are the final shots of the lantern. Thanks for watching.